and welcome to Creative Confidence. I'm Angela Nicholson, the founder of SheClicks.
And I'm Katie Teasdale-Ward from Kudosity.
So today, Katie and I are joined by Donna Crous, a fantastic food photographer and an ambassador for Nikon and Rotolight. And I'm really worried, actually, Donna, that my stomach is going to rumble through this because just thinking about your photography makes me really hungry. But it's great to see you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I watch these series of yours, and Katie, you totally inspire me. You are just so open and honest, and I love the fact that, you know, in an industry where we always almost feel like we have to put on a face, your honesty and your openness is just so welcome, and I'm looking forward to today. I hope that everybody gets something out of this today.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you. Good. Let's crack on. Let's inspire.
So, Donna, we thought it might be helpful if you could perhaps tell people, you know, where you're at the moment and a little bit about how you got to where you are.
Well, okay, so I'm a professional food photographer, as you mentioned. I'm also a Nikon Europe ambassador and a Rotolight. They call it Master of Light, but it's a top tier ambassador program for Rotolight. And it's been quite a journey getting here. And I have to say that actually it's been quite a quick journey. I only started photography about 5 or 6 years ago. So I'm still very new to this whole industry and very new to the professional world of photography as well. Before that, I was a stay-at-home mum. So for me, I stopped working. I was in banking when I had my children, when I had my 2 daughters. And at the time I stopped working, I thought I would have my children, I would be able to go back to work, and I would just pick up and carry on. And then I realized that as they got older, they got more complicated. So the little ones are actually easier to work with than the older ones. And so I ended up staying at home for a lot longer than I expected. And then I kind of came out of this motherhood phase, and I thought, well, I've got no skills. I've got nothing that is marketable. I'd been home for 20 odd years working, bringing up my children. And then I felt like I didn't have anything that I could take out into the workforce. But I really wanted to do something. And I kind of just, one thing I do love and I've always had a passion for was cooking. And I decided to start a blog. At the same time, we'd moved to the UK from South Africa. And it just gave me something to do when everybody was off at work and school. I was at home on my own in a new country. So I started blogging. I started putting together my recipes, and I started photographing them. And that's kind of how I got onto the food photography side, because I realized that was actually where my passion lay, was on the photography side. And yeah, so 5 or 6 years, actually about 6 years ago, yeah, it all kind of started to come together.
That is a really short time, isn't it? When you decided to become a blogger, did you do that as an intention of making it your business or initially, or did you do it sort of thinking, well, this is something interesting that I want to do?
I went into doing, so what happened was, I was blogging we were eating a kind of dietary lifestyle that is very well known in South Africa. In South Africa, it's called banting. In the UK, it's paleo or keto. And my friends and family were constantly emailing me saying, won't you send me this recipe for this muffin? And won't you send me a recipe for that? And so it kind of became, and it was one friend in particular, he kept on sending me the same question for the same recipe. And I eventually just thought, well, I wonder if I just put it onto a central place as a blog, that they can just get to it whenever they want to, instead of me having to resend the email every single time she wants the same recipe. And so it was really inspired by that. So it wasn't, it was to keep myself occupied and to keep myself busy, but it was also just to be able to put my recipes out for my friends and family back in South Africa. So it was kind of just the timing of that. I think in a way there was at a later stage an intention to monetize it, which then drove me to improve my skills and to make sure that my photography was at a level where I could start to attract more viewers, longer views on the blog, keeping people to the blog, keeping them returning. On the Instagram side, drawing people off Instagram onto the blog. So it was more kind of, that's where that side really started to develop. But I think at a later stage, I did kind of, when my numbers started to increase and it started to gain momentum, that's where I thought, well, you know, maybe I can actually turn this into a business, and I can start to monetize it. So yeah, that's really how it sort of started to grow.
So I guess thinking about the timeline, I mean, we assume that Instagram has been massive all the time, and it's just kind of because it's so ingrained in our lives now. But 6 years ago, it was on the radar, but I don't think it was bought by Facebook by then. I don't know. I think it was still as an independent stream. So it was still big, but not the size that we know it now. And it's interesting to see that your route was more of the writing first, and that sort of that intention of putting out your story via recipes, via the frequency of, I would be that friend that would be asking all the time for the same recipe, because I do it for my mum every time for the orange and raisin loaf cake. I'm like, Mum, please. She's like, 47 years old, you should know by now. But it is that you kind of pivoted from finding a way of the storytelling through the blog, then the visual storytelling with obviously the photography, and kind of being aware of where people are, but not necessarily from I'm marketing it first. You did the storytelling of you first, and then it was kind of, I find that a really interesting and insightful view of how you didn't push it, but you were just aware of it. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me it was really to keep me occupied. It was also I as soon as I started to get involved and start to share my images on Instagram, because when I first started my blog, I put it out there, I made it live, and I sat back and I watched, and there was nothing. It was crickets. I was so excited. I thought I'm going to put my blog out there, and suddenly I'm going to be inundated, and there was nothing. I would watch the SEO numbers, and there was like nobody would come. And then the first time I got excited was actually a spam message. I realized, I thought, I've got to actually do something. I've got to find another way of getting people to my blog. And that's when I started to really build my Instagram side. And it was just, for me, it was just such a learning growth skill. I mean, as I said, I came out of motherhood, and I'm not a technical person at the best of times. My husband's involved in IT. So he always kind of says, okay, step out the way, let me do this. So I went into this new world. I mean, I was probably just over 40. I was just over 40. It was a whole new learning curve for me. And particularly going into Instagram, where my teenage daughters were on Instagram, and they were dying of embarrassment, saying, Mom, why did you post pictures of your breakfast this morning? Now my friends have all just seen what we've eaten for breakfast. So it was actually quite embarrassing for them at that stage that their mother was on Instagram doing this stuff. But I loved the learning curve, and I loved researching it and studying and finding out more and more information. And I think, yeah, it was definitely unintentional. But that is a big part of my business today, is that I don't particularly go into business with an intention to make money, and or with an intention to make a lot of money out of it. For me, it's about the love of what I'm doing. And if I can learn something from it and still gain something from it, that is absolutely key for me. So I think it's probably just the way I am. I'm terrible when it comes to pricing and billing people and all of that. I'm the worst because I love it.
Yeah, but it is that finding, just being aware of what takes your attention, giving attention to what takes your attention, I guess. Yes. And just thinking, do you know what? I think we get into, as photographers, or especially, I mean, as a mother of two younger children, but you're so starved of time most of the time that when you are, that when something does grab your attention or does spark your interest creatively, give that as much as your time as you can, and see where it takes you. It doesn't have to be, I'm going, I like taking photos of my kids, so I'm going to be a portrait photographer, and I'm going to, have a Squarespace site, and I'm going to be this. Or I like being in landscape, so I'm going to be a landscape photographer. I think when time is precious, there is that sometimes that fear that we must tick that box of it's got to be this, it's got to be perfect, and it's got to be making money. Where I think the message from you is that you went with that flow, with that kind of the creativity led your journey, rather than thinking it needs to be perfect, I need to be making X amount of money from it.
That is absolutely key. And I think I'm often asked how I developed such a recognizable style. And I think it's definitely because I was doing it for myself. So I actually remember meeting a very well-known food photographer, and he actually did a portfolio review of my portfolio in the very early days. And he said to me, his words to me were, I'm actually quite jealous of the fact that you've got a recognizable style at such an early age, at such an early stage in your photography career, because he said, I started off as an apprentice, and I started off working for clients, and I've never been able to develop a recognizable style because I've been doing work for so many other people that have never actually done anything for myself. So I think it's really important to actually do stuff for yourself so that you do develop that style, you do actually grow and learn to do exactly what you like to do, and not try and do what everybody else wants you to do. You know, I think that's super important in growing on the creative side.
And do you think that's helped maintain your interest level in what you're doing?
Definitely. And that was one of the things also when I first started, I would get a lot of requests. So people hear you're a photographer and they just think that as a photographer, you just pick up a camera and you can go and shoot anything. You can go and shoot landscapes and your cousin's wedding and your brother's baby. And, you know, to actually become a master in those areas, you've got to hone in and you've got to stay true to the area that you're working in. So for me, I always refused to do anything else, because what I didn't want to do was I didn't want to go and shoot a cousin's wedding and have it turn into an utter disaster and then never want to pick up my camera again. So for me, it was food or nothing. And even to the point where I wouldn't even do products, because food can overlap a lot with products. And even now, I'm very selective about the product shoots that I do, because I need to know that it's within my area of speciality. I'll still take my camera out and go and photograph other things, but I'm very cautious about putting myself out there in another genre, in another area of photography, that I know that there are other incredible photographers that can actually do a better job than me. I would rather just stick to exactly what I know and grow the skills in that area. And to be fair, food has a large area to grow skills in. You've got the styling side, you've got the cooking side. There's a lot of areas that you can develop those skills in. So it's a constant learning curve for me.
Now, I think that's really interesting, because I think there's two kind of strands to that. One, on one side, you're kind of maintaining your reputation by not taking on something that you don't feel comfortable with, or perhaps wouldn't be able to deliver the best work. But also you're and managing your confidence levels as well at the same time. So, you know that you're what you're good at, and you know how to, all the things that you need to do with food photography. But if you went to shoot a wedding, then suddenly, you're in a completely different world, and it'd be very different expectations, very different things that you've got to do. So it's kind of helping to kind of control how you feel about it as well.
Definitely. And I have seen, and I have worked with, I have mentored a lot of photographers, and I've seen them go out and do really big jobs. And don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing wrong with taking on a new, big, exciting job and definitely challenging yourself. But there's also a point where you can actually really lose confidence by taking on a big job that you're not comfortable in. It's totally out of your zone. It's something you've never done, especially if somebody's relying on it. Like a wedding, you can't reshoot again. You can't go back and reshoot that. So you've got to be so careful and know that this is definitely something within your zone that you can actually deliver on at the end of the day. Otherwise, I've seen it happen where people have taken on these bigger jobs or these bigger clients, and then totally been crushed, and then refuse to pick up a camera after that. So it's really about finding that balance and that comfort zone, and that level of knowing, yes, every job that I go into, I'm still a bit nervous. I'm still cautious, and I still think, oh, can I do it? Still get those butterflies. That's good. That's fine. That's pushing myself out of my comfort zone in my area. But to go in and do something that's way out of my league in another area, I would be very cautious about doing that.
And I think that's something we can take into enthusiast or amateur photography as well, because I see a lot of photographers who kind of beat themselves up because they don't know how to, I don't know, photograph rugby or shoot a wedding or something. But you think, well, you're brilliant at doing ICM, intentional camera movement, or you've taken fantastic still life shots or brilliant portraits of your daughter or something like that. And rather than sort of accepting that they need to learn that area, they kind of another area if they want to get into it, they kind of beat themselves up about it and lack confidence. Whereas I think with professional photographers, they're much clearer about what their genre is, and that's what they focus on.
Absolutely.
And you wouldn't ask a landscape photographer probably to photograph your wedding.
And even within the genre, if I get a job that I feel is totally out of my zone, I'm very happy to pass it on to a photographer, to another food photographer that I know is within their zone. So for instance, even restaurant photography, that's not an area that I work in. I do it on occasion, but it's not my area of speciality. Mine's more studio. So if I get a request for a restaurant shoot, I'll say, look, I'm not comfortable doing it. I'll happily do it if you want me to, but can I rather recommend this photographer, because I know that that's what he does or she does. They'll go there and they've got the full setup, and it'll be a quick 1 hour or 2 hour shoot. So you save the client from the stress of you spending 8 hours there and yourself spending 8 hours there because you're out of your comfort zone. So I'm very happy to pass it on and stick to the clients that fall within my area.
I like that you have shared that you still get excited, but you still get nervous, before going into a shoot or doing a shoot. And I think that that's really encouraging for photographers, whether they're amateurs or professionals, to have people share, do you know what, I still get excited, but I still absolutely, there are times when I'm nervous, because the two, are very, very, you can decide whether you want to be nervous or excited. They sit very, very closely together. But I think the more that people can share, do you know what, I am prepared. I know what I'm doing. There's a reason that I've been asked to do this, and that kind of managing that imposter syndrome. I'd be interested to know what kind of techniques you use to sort of anchor yourself before taking, doing a shoot.
So what's really important for me is when I get that email in that says, will you do this? And when you get that email and your initial reaction is, oh no, I can't do that. I don't reply. I get up and I walk away and I leave it for a day. I've got to have time to process it. I've got to have time to think about it. And my husband is very grounding for me as well. So I always run everything through him. And he is always the first person to say, of course you can do it. That's fine. I'm sitting there going, I can't do this. I've never done this before. And he's going, of course you can. It's just the same as what you did in the last shoot. Or, he kind of just puts it together he normalizes it for me. And then I actually find that I start to get quite excited about it. And that's when it's almost like there's a flip over in my head. And then I go from initially saying absolutely no ways to, yes, I can do this. And this is actually going to be fun. And then I start to process it. And then I come up with all these ideas. So for me, I never reply immediately. I always take time to really kind of think about it, sleep on it, answer the email the next day. The client is not expecting an email. I'm sure they would love an email an hour later, but if you send them an email the next day, at least you've got all your ducks in a row, you know what you're doing, and that's definitely giving it a little bit of extra time. Definitely gives me that extra confidence when it comes to taking it on. I mean, I remember my first book that I ever did. I was actually friends with a blogger, and I didn't realize at the time that she was interviewing or she was choosing her photographer. And I sent her through a picture. It's a long story about how I helped her with a recipe. And I sent through a picture of the recipe when it was completed. And she sent me an email back, or she sent me a message back on Instagram saying, oh my gosh, I didn't realize you were a food photographer. And I went back saying, well, no, I'm not. I'm a blogger and I photograph my food. And she said, well, actually, she said, would you photograph for me? And I was like, yeah, okay. Well, she said, well, actually, I'm choosing a photographer to shoot my book. Would you shoot my book? And immediately my reaction was, no, I can't shoot a book. And had to think about it. And my husband had to say, well, what's the difference between a book and 70 recipes that go onto your website? So, and I went back saying, yes, I'll do it. And I woke up that morning. thinking, well, it's just another blogging day for me. And I went to bed that night having signed a contract with the publishers for her book. So it's definitely about taking on that challenge and rising to it.
Yeah, I love that idea of managing your personal expectations first, and then rather than thinking, oh, the client needs to have, you know, they've emailed me, so they want me, and if I don't reply in the next couple of hours, they'll go to somebody else. It's like, no, that whole 24-hour period of processing, I think, is such an important process and technique to, like you say, to just take on board all of those different elements, to have the mental kind of, you know, back and forward, but also to develop the creativity. Because I think often when especially when we're freelance, or we get something in an email and it's somebody that's saying, we want to work with you, your initial reaction is great, also terrified, but great. And then you kind of think that what they're proposing might just be a fait accompli, when in fact there could be lots of different opportunities and possibility and creative possibilities that the client may not have thought of, not because they weren't thinking creatively themselves, but because they were in a job to pitch to a client to make sure, you know, whether it's an advert or whatever. So I think it shows that you take control of that conversation and your confidence, and you then help shape your narrative, and you're then really working as a really consultative creative process, rather than somebody being employed by another person to do a job. And I think from having worked in different companies, that's exactly who you want to work with. That is like your dream collaboration, rather than just somebody, you know, you sending out a pitch, can you do this? Yeah, and it's done. You know, the way in which you approach it, digest it, and then represent it, I think is you know, a really good example of how to work.
And I think you can also be open and honest with a client and say, look, I don't necessarily shoot in that style, but I'll definitely give it a go. And, you know, and let's work together on it, and let's go through this together. And for me, it's definitely about a collaboration, as you say, rather than a client kind of an employee-employer kind of situation. So it's definitely about saying, look, it's not my field of expertise, but I have done that before in the past, and I'm happy to give it another go, and let's work on it together, and we'll see. And those are some of the best collaborations that I've come up with, that I've been in, is when we actually are working together as a team, and it's not sort of just a separate, this is what you do and this is what you have to do kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the fact that, you know, when you were first approached to photograph a book, you said, oh, no, I'm not a photographer, I'm a blogger. At what point, was it when you finished the book that you started to say you were a photographer, or did it take a little bit more?
That was around the same time that I entered Pink Lady, my first Pink Lady Food Photographer of the Year. So, and again, it was literally imposter syndrome from every side, because I didn't have a qualification in photography, and I don't know where you draw a line in the sand and go from not being a photographer to being a photographer. And I don't know, for me, if it was the Pink Lady Food Photographer or if it was finishing the book. But I remember when I got payment for that book, and the payment came in, and my husband turned to me and he said, you know what, you're actually a professional food photographer now. And that was when I was like, oh, wow, okay, that was a moment for me. I hadn't actually even processed it until then. And it was just when the money came into the bank account, suddenly I was like, okay, now I'm actually a professional at this. And I don't know where it was. And I think it's something I do encounter a lot with other photographers now. And I find that especially the female photographers, it's almost like we have to have a qualification to justify that we're a photographer. And it's so not the case. It's like, for me, I firmly believe that if you pick up a camera and you photograph something and you love that picture, you're a photographer, whether you're an amateur, whether you're professional, whether you're shooting whether you're photographing with a phone. You can, if that's what you love, you can call yourself a photographer. There's no line in the sand that you have to cross over to qualify. And And I think that's where I really struggled. And changing my status on Facebook to a photographer, that was a big moment in my life. It was like, wow, I'm actually a photographer. Like, and I still, again, felt imposter syndrome, thinking, what if somebody asks me, like, how did you become a photographer? Like, what do you do to be a photographer? Like, I was still worried about that. But yeah, it's changing. I think that was a big moment for me, was changing my just on my personal account, changing my Facebook status.
That's hilarious, because it is that one of the, you know, when it's almost that when you go from single to married or married to divorced or whatever it is, the changing the status on Facebook, and then it notifies everyone. It's like, oh, I've put it out there.
Exactly, it's official.
Yeah, exactly, totally official. And I love that almost feel like the payment for the book, that was you allowing yourself to call yourself a professional photographer. And you know, I find that so interesting, because, and I wonder if people could just be braver with titles, or you know, or not. I mean, it doesn't matter either way, really. You know, if they, like you say, if they are enjoying the photography, they're loving it, if it is giving something back to them creatively, if it feeds their soul, whatever, call yourself a photographer, you know. And
I agree.
Love it.
I agree. And I see it so often where people go, well, I'm not really a photographer, but I do like photographing. It's like, well, then you're a photographer. You know, go for it. Have fun. Call yourself a photographer. Change your Facebook status if you want to. Go for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't have to be a professional either. You're a photographer if you love photography.
Absolutely.
I'm interested in your motivation for submitting to the Pink Lady Food Photographer of the Year Awards. What sort of triggered you to enter that?
Well, I'd somewhere along the line seen something on social media about Pink Lady Food Photographer, and obviously, and whenever they do all their marketing, they use photographs of food. So I just started to follow them. I subscribed to their newsletter. So and I went onto their website just to see pictures of food. So it was nothing. Again, I didn't consider myself a photographer. So it was really just, I mean, I was just looking everywhere for food images to see what I could, to find inspiration, and to see how people were shooting and what they were doing. And so 5 days or 7 days before the entry submissions close, they start a countdown. So they start a daily newsletter that goes out that says 7 days left and 6 days left. And this newsletter started to come through. And for some reason, somewhere along the line, I just thought, I've got a couple of good pictures that did quite well on Instagram. I wonder if I should just submit them. And where, I mean, I'm the queen of imposter syndrome. So I was like, but I'm not a photographer. Should I enter? And then I was like, okay, well, I'll only enter the blogging category because I'm a blogger. I'm not a photographer. And so it was this whole like tug of war that went on with me about entering into a photography competition. And yeah, I mean, best thing I ever did, because that's really the start of my career, was entering. And the first year I was placed third in that category. And again, even when I never expected to get anything back. It was more just a step into putting myself out there. It wasn't, again, with no intention of what I would get back. And then I got an email back saying, oh, you've been shortlisted. And I didn't really know what that meant. I was like, okay, well, what does that mean? And then I the email back to say, you've been selected as a finalist. And I was like, oh, okay, well, you know, that's great. Went along to the exhibition that they have at the gallery, and saw my picture for the first time. And that was when I was like, okay, this is much bigger than I expected. This is a whole different ball game to what I was picturing. So yeah, I mean, it was a big step, and one that I absolutely will never regret.
I think we talk a lot about people just encouraging anyone to enter competitions. You know, photography competitions doesn't have to be global. It can be local. It can be, you know, whatever size of competition. Just to almost, because I think there is always, you know, the when we've had the conversations, we've talked about kind of the desire to just say, do you know what, I'm just going to go for it. and I'm not expecting, I may win something, I might not, but just that, like, almost kind of like breaking the seal. And so, because when you do it once, that's it, you've proven to yourself, your track record instantly says you have had 100% success rate in entering competitions. Now that is, that's just one stamp away from saying I can't enter competitions or I can't submit. So it is just being brave, isn't it? And just going, do you know what, why not? And I love the fact that you say that you entered it for the blogging category, because I might not have entered if it had been photography.
Exactly. That's exactly it. But another thing that I always talk about, which I think is really important, is if you're not prepared to put yourself into a big international competition, then just join a camera club.
Yeah.
And submit on a monthly basis to the camera club competitions. And I'm a member of a camera club, and I submit, and I still get so nervous when my picture comes up for judging. I still get so nervous, like my heart's going, I'm sweating, and I've got this absolute fear of it. Are they going to hate it? And but it's so important, I think, particularly for camera clubs, because you get that feedback from judges. And to take that feedback and not take it as constructive criticism, and to use it to grow from. And I think that is a really important step into entering the photography world, or entering into the competition world, is to start putting yourself out, just baby steps, into a camera club. And not every camera club works for everyone. And if you try a camera club and it's not great, go and find another one, because there are some really, really exceptional camera clubs out there, and really supportive and really encouraging camera clubs. And go and find a camera club that you feel like you belong to, and you can put your images in, and you can get that constructive feedback, because it's really, really important to get that feedback.
And also, you make a really good point about if the fit isn't right for the first camera club, there are alternatives. That it's just by joining one, and if you have not particularly great experience, it doesn't mean that your experience of a different one is going to be the same. And everybody has choice, but be really mindful that you can, you're just signing up for one experience. It's not going to be the same for everything else.
Definitely. I went around to a number of different camera clubs before I settled on the one that I'm in now. And it does make a big difference. You do have to feel comfortable. You've got to feel like you're being encouraged and confident. And it's really about that confidence. And it's not just about going and sitting and watching what other photographers are doing. It's taking that step and getting involved and putting your stuff out there at the same time. I mean, by all means, go and watch and see what they're doing, and see the types of images that are being submitted. But at the same time, it's about encouraging, pushing yourself just that little bit, just to put yourself out there. You never know what you're going to get back.
Yeah, exactly. And build up that resilience.
Yeah.
It's the confidence will come with feedback, and that may not always be with people going, yes, I love, because that's, find out why you're asking for feedback. Are you asking for feedback because you want to grow as a photographer, or are you asking it because you want the encouragement to keep going? Be mindful of kind of the motivation for what the feedback, and from where that feedback is coming from.
Absolutely. And even sometimes within the camera club competitions, you'll get a judge who maybe your style of photography doesn't appeal to them. And I mean, I've seen that where we've had one image, and not necessarily mine, but there was one image that was incredibly strong. And then at the final end of year competition, it was a different judge judging it. And it hit a note in him that he just didn't like that image. And I mean, in my opinion, it probably should have won the whole competition, but there was something in it that just he didn't like. And that doesn't mean that it's not a great image, and that doesn't mean that it shouldn't have won or whatever. But it is subjective at the end of the day as well. So you do have to take it with a pinch of salt. But I think in general, I've had very few judges where I've walked away thinking, that wasn't right. Yeah. And if I do, and sometimes, and particularly on the food side, I do things the way I want it to look. So it's not always within the technical world of photography. So I like to work with a very shallow depth of field, and I like to crop some of my images so not the whole images in, which doesn't always fly with a camera club judge. And I've got to know to separate that from this is my individual style as opposed to this is what the judge is judging on technically for a camera club or for a bigger competition. And to be able to walk away from that going, this is how I wanted the picture to look and this is how it will stay. I'm not going to change that.
Yeah. I think that takes confidence. I think that also takes the experience of repeating that to yourself, of saying, you know, this is my style of photography. This is, you know, this is something that rocks my boat and that I love. And it's, when you're in a camera club competition, it's a different, you know, it's a different ball game to when you're producing work that you love and is potentially for a client or whatever. They're buying from you your photography, your style, and being brave and honest and, you know, just straight saying this is my gig, you know, this is the stuff that I like to shoot and the style that I like to shoot it in. And I think that if more people could really hear that more often, it would then stop this kind of indecision, because it's kind of, oh, well, am I doing it the right way? Because I knew that if I could do it in this way, which is my way, but then perhaps they're not going to like it. And then this internal monologue kind of blows up. And before you know it, that creativity and kind of motivation starts being dialed down. And I think what you're saying is, you know, stick to what it is that you love, how you love to do it, and really be in charge of your own narrative. And that's what I think is so bang on from that.
And you know, even for me, I almost have two photography worlds. I have my client photography world where I shoot in a very different style. I shoot according to how the client wants it. So my personal style is dark and moody, you know, the kind of style that I like to shoot in, but my clients don't necessarily want that. And particularly on the cookery book side, they want it more food focused. They want all in focus. They don't want shallow depth of field, and which is totally different to the style that I prefer to shoot in. But I take time to shoot my stuff and my work, and I put that on my portfolio and I put that on my Instagram. And it's a lot of the time it's very different to what I'll shoot for a client. But that's where that's what fills my manner. That's what fills my creativity, and it gets my juices flowing, is doing that type of photography that I don't really honestly care what anybody else thinks of it. I don't have a client at the other end saying, yes, we like it. No, we don't. We want to reshoot. What I do, and if I want to pour sort of chicken gravy over an ice cream, I can do that, because there's nobody there. There's nobody who's going to tell me otherwise. Yeah. And I think that's really important, is to be able to play around and push yourself into areas that you don't really care what other people think. This is how I want to do it, and this is how I'm going to play around and do it. And sometimes you don't even have to even put it out there. You don't even have to put it onto Instagram. Just playing around and just growing and playing with lighting and different setups and different camera settings, all of these things. It's really just about growing and exploring and experimenting as well. Yeah.
And thinking about you're an ambassador for two great brands, Nikon and Rotolight. How did that come about? Did you approach them? Did they approach you?
They both approached me. So particularly with Nikon, I was, and again, this goes back to confidence. So after my first Pink Lady award, I was then approached through Pink Lady by the photography show to do a talk on food photography. And I was terrified of public speaking. I didn't even stand up and do any speeches at family members' weddings or birthdays or anything. I just refused point blank to do public speaking. So my initial reaction again was no, I can't. I just cannot stand up on a stage and talk. Anyway, thought it over, and I chatted to them at the show, to Ruth from the show. And I thought, you know what, actually, there's a little bit of a motto that I've developed in my life, particularly in my business side, which is do one thing a day that scares you. And I thought, okay, right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to bite the bullet and I'm going to do it. And I mean, for months before, every time I thought photography show, my stomach would drop into butterflies. But I still did it. And it was a great talk. And I did it with a friend of mine, B. Lubas, who's also a food photographer. And it just went down so well. And it was so exhilarating and so inspiring, and met people. It was just fantastic. And then the next year, Nikon got in touch with me because they'd met me. They'd been in touch with the photography show, and they were obviously looking for a Nikon photographer and a new area of photography. And then Nikon School got in touch with me and said, will you come and speak for us? And again, my initial reaction was no. I mean, it's too technical. This is Nikon. This is camera stuff. This is not the area that I'm strong in. I don't call my, I'm definitely not a technical photographer. I'm definitely more of a creative photographer. And again, Nikon were just phenomenal. And they said, we are the technical people. We want you to come and talk about photography. That's what we want. We want to share with our users how to take photographs and inspire them. So they again talked me into it, and I started, and so I started at the photography show with Nikon. The second year was the two talks with the photography show and then with Nikon. And then again, I was introduced to Rotolight through Nikon. So it's just opening doors everywhere. And I think it's so important to say yes to opportunities that do scare you, because you just don't know where they're going to go. You just really have no idea.
And with the first talk that you did, you said you did it jointly with a friend of yours. Was that sort of suggested by the photography show, or did you suggest that as, you know, kind of like, well, I'll have my buddy with me and we'll be able to do it together and we can support each other? Yeah,
that was exactly it. I had seen B speaking somewhere else, and she had been talking with another photographer, and I loved the fact that they bounced off each other, and they had different techniques and they had different ways of doing things. And that's when I said to the photography show, would you mind if I do it with somebody else? Because she's got a totally different style to me. We have a different approach. And I think that between the two of us, we can actually offer photographers different insights into the same area. And for me, that was when I was learning. I loved the fact that I could listen to two photographers and have two totally different opinions and not be told, this is how you do it. Because that I didn't want to do. I didn't want to get up and say, this is how you have to do photography, you know. And feel that there's a right or wrong way, because there's so many different ways you can do it. And so I love the fact that the two of us were able to get up and talk about the same subject and have different opinions. Yeah,
I think that's a great approach. So, I mean, it sounds like, you know, everything, you didn't necessarily set out to be where you are now, but, you know, you're working as a professional food photographer, you're an ambassador, you know, there's lots of things going on. Have you actually had any significant setbacks during that period?
Definitely. I mean, I had a setback a couple of months ago where I was working with a photographer, a male photographer, and he was extremely technical and I'm not. And it totally rattled my confidence so badly. And actually, it was around, I mean, there was a point where imposter syndrome set him hugely. And I listened to Katie's talk on imposter syndrome. And it just, and that re-inspired me again, because there's so many different, and again, I think, and it was along with Katie's talk and along with my husband lifting me up and saying, well, he's not a food photographer. So if he had to take what you do, if you were in his world, I was in his world. And my husband said, if he had to come into your world, would he be able to do what you do? And I think that was a big learning curve for me, is to realize that, you know, I do things differently to how somebody else will do it. And would they manage in my world? And maybe I wouldn't manage in their world. Maybe they wouldn't manage in my world. But it was really interesting and then Katie literally reiterated everything that he had been saying to me. And you know, when your husband says it to you, it's like, oh yeah, whatever. But then Katie said it. It was almost like she was looking at me through the screen saying, Donna, this is how it is. And it just all fell into place from there. And it was, and I was back on my feet. And sometimes you just need that little rattle, and you know, to know. And it's okay to admit that you are not a technical photographer. It's okay to say that. It's okay to say I'm more of a creative photographer, because I think there are two different camps. And I think there are a lot of photographers out there who only shoot technically, exactly what they should be doing with a camera. I taught myself. I picked up a camera. So there's a lot of terminologies in that I still don't even understand. Yeah. But I shoot with a camera, and I get it to work for me. And I at the end of the day, I get an image out of it that I really like, and I'm happy with. And I think that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think
that's fantastic. Well done, Katie. And well done, Donna, for getting past that.
Yeah, but it's also, it is part of the human condition. You know, we think that all professionals are resilient, 100% resilient, 100% confident, 100% without imposter syndrome all the time. It is part of the human condition, and sometimes it is just getting that in check and just going, do you know what, it's fine if I'm feeling like this right now. This is what I can do well. This is the proof. This is where I am, and move it, and it never stops you moving forward. I think that the theme that's kind of tied the whole of this, you know, webinar together is everything that's come along has not stopped you from moving forward. The pace may have been different. You may be thinking, you know, 6 years ago, I did not think I was going to be here. Doesn't matter, you know, pivot, be
Absolutely.
quick, don't let it stop you.
Yeah, but there's a fine line between imposter syndrome and crippling, and where you actually don't do anything about it. And you know, imposter syndrome is good. It can again, you get nervous about doing things, but it's about overcoming it. And you can't let it become crippling to the point that you don't do anything. And I think that's so. For me, it was a point of, I had to pick myself up, dust myself off, taken a deep breath and go, you know what, you can actually do this, and you're actually good at what you do, and it's, you know, your clients are happy with the work, everything else is great, everything else, you know, there's no reason why I should be feeling like this, and just dust yourself off and carry on. And I think that's really important, is to be able to take that time, have a little wallow, have a little can I do this kind of thing, but dust yourself off and try and carry on. It's really, I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, getting everything back into perspective, I think, like you say, it's just so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
So would it be a good time to go to some questions? Because we do have some questions.
Yes, let's do it.
Great. Okay. So first question. Donna says, thank you for sharing your journey. She was wondering how you work on your style. She's a few questions in connection with this. So was your development intuitive, ad hoc, or were you quite methodical and ordered?
Totally intuitive. And I think particularly around my style, it was also environmental. So when I started shooting, I was shooting in my home studio, and I still shoot in a home studio. And so it wasn't a kind of a white walled studio with a full lighting rig. So I really had to make it work for me. And I think that's where I developed a particular style, because I was working with color casts off my walls and sort of different setups and balancing things against the cat scratcher in the old days. So it was really kind of like a makeshift kind of studio that I was working in. So I think a lot of my style was developed through that kind of working in this environment. But it was intuitive. It was also inspired by a lot of other photographers. I really looked at a lot of other photographers' work, broke it down, had a look at how they did their lighting, what parts of the image I really loved, where they placed their dishes and their bowls and their food, and how they styled their food. So it was a whole combination of, I pretty much immersed myself. I went into this kind of food photography kind of feast, where I read every book, I watched YouTube videos, I did everything. And in those days, actually, there wasn't a lot available. So it was really kind of getting the Waitrose magazine and looking at the pictures in the Waitrose magazine and breaking it down and trying to find what I really, really loved about all those images and try and create it in my own. And there were some shocking ones that I did. I mean, there were some appalling ones. And whenever I do a talk, I always show my first pictures. And they're actually on my Instagram. So if anybody wants to go back, I'm very proud of my initial pictures. They are horrendous, but they do need to be out there. People need to see them.
I was wondering about that, whether you'd left everything as original on there.
I have. Definitely, because it's not about now, it's about my development, it's about my growth the whole way through. And I mean, my first pictures were absolutely appalling. And when I started a talk, I always start with these pictures, and I know that people are looking at them thinking, is this what I've signed up for? I could do a better job than this, because it's important to see that there is growth, there is potential, and I'm still learning. Every time I put out a picture, I think that the one is better than the next one. Then, you know, I'm still learning. We're always still learning.
Absolutely. And that
improving.
reframing of failure, you know, that reframing of failure is so important, because everybody gets constipated about it. And it's like, we've got to start talking about that. You know, what you see now isn't necessarily, it didn't just appear like this. There's been growth, there's been development, there's been all this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely didn't just appear.
And there's a little follow-up on this question, which is, what do you do when you can't achieve the effect that you want?
I will walk away. Again, it's like that. It's like the email, and you do reach a point where you're actually just throwing stuff in to try and achieve an effect. And a lot of the time, I've got to walk away from it. Take the dog for a walk, have a cup of tea, go and watch something on the telly, and then go back to it. Then sometimes it'll work. Other times I've got to restart the whole thing, and I've got to go back to the drawing board and change the background, change the props, change everything, and try and find another way to address it. So yeah, it could be a combination of one small thing can make a big difference, and just separating myself from that set and from that shoot can make the difference, or restarting it, even if it's within the same shoot or on a different day. It just depends. Yeah, but it's okay to say it's not working. It's okay to say it's not working, and you know, as a photographer, when you've got that image, you know, when you've got that perfect hero shot that you're happy with. And a lot of the time I will just keep going until I've got that shot. Otherwise, I've got a thing. I will not put out anything that I am not 100% in love with. And so I've got to sign off on that before it goes out, and I'll keep going until I do. It can take me hours sometimes. Yeah.
And we've got another question here, which is about your commissioned work. How many people tend to be involved with your commission shoots?
One, me.
Just you?
Just me.
So, because the follow-up question was that, what roles do they play? So basically, are you the stylist as well as the photographer and the cook?
So on the odd occasion, I've used a home economist who will come in and do the cooking and prep everything. I will still do the styling and the photography, but that's very small. Most of the time, with all the books that I've shot, with most of my client work, it's me doing the shopping, cooking, styling, photography, post-production, and yeah. So it's a one-man band generally, which was really handy during COVID. Sorry.
Yes, I guess so. I was going to say, at the end of it, is the food still edible, or does it depend what it is?
Yes, definitely. It's still edible. I don't use anything that you can't eat. I normally have some family member hovering over saying, "Oh, that smells delicious. Can I have some of that?" Yeah, and yeah, I'll prop things up. I'll move things around within the food. So I might have a little makeup sponge propping something up or holding it up, but that can all be removed and it can still be eaten and washed and sorted out. So yeah, there's nothing that goes on that's not edible. There's no fake.
Although, what was it? Chicken, gravy and ice cream is an unusual combination.
Well, I mean, that's just creative. That's it's still edible if you wanted to eat.
Yes. I guess if somebody thought it was caramel sauce, it might give them a bit of a shock, but there you go. So another question. It's more related to your work. So how do you go about getting your portfolio reviewed?
There are photographers who are available who do portfolio reviews. I'm not great with portfolio reviews because I like everybody's work. So I'm not one of those people who I don't like giving criticism, because I do think it's important to still grow your confidence as well. But there are some, and I think it's a real art to be able to give good constructive criticism without breaking somebody down. And there are photographers out there who do portfolio reviews. But yeah, in terms of food photography, I know that there is a festival. Obviously, with COVID, I don't know if that's happening. And I think it's held in Sweden or Denmark every 2 years, and it's a professional food photography festival. And you can actually go and submit your portfolio and have it reviewed by a panel of food photographers. And that, I think, is really good food photography feedback. And then in general, I think if you belong to not on the food photography side, but on the photography side, if you do belong to a camera club, you can generally find one of the senior members will have some form of judging experience and judging knowledge, and they might be able to give you a portfolio review as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have a recommended sort of rough number of images that should go in a portfolio?
This is always an interesting question, because I know that they always say that you should be really selective and put through only your best images, and it should be a small amount. I very seldom do what everybody else does. So I have loads of images on my portfolio, because on my website, because I know that I know when I go into other photographers' portfolios and it's a particular portfolio that I like, I always want to see more. And for me, I would rather put out more, you know, just so that people have a selection, so viewers have a selection of, and to be able to see what I can do. On the printed side, obviously it's more expensive, so, and you don't want to be lugging around a massive big book. So yes, you have to be, I think, for a printed portfolio, probably 20 of your best images. But on the website, I think to have a really good selection of everything that you can do, so to show different styles of photography, to show different settings, it's really good to show that you're versatile as a photographer. So I think you can be a little bit more generous with the amount of images on a website.
Okay, yes, guess it makes a lot of sense. And would you recommend that somebody looks for somebody who employs a similar style, or do you think it's not so important?
In terms of mentoring and
Yeah.
working, yeah. No, I don't think it's important. I think to understand how the basis of how a shoot works, and behind the scenes of what goes on in a shoot is more important. And I think you need to be your own individual, and to actually get somewhere in this industry, you need to stand out. So I think it's important that you do stay true to your own style, even if you need to work with a photographer who understands how the industry works, who can teach you how the industry works, but at the same time still trying to stay true to your own particular style. And you know, if that photographer that you're working with is a professional photographer and they've got a well-respected name in the industry, you don't want to be second to them. You don't want to be the person who shoots like them. You need to develop your own style that's totally unique, and not mirroring or mimicking that particular photographer's style, because they'll always come out, they'll always get the jobs anyway, they'll always come out tops at the end anyway. So yeah, be true to yourself.
That's a very good point. We've got a couple of questions about camera clubs, and someone is asking if is it okay to join any camera club, or do you have to be location specific? I think basically she found that the local club isn't really suiting her, so she wants to go somewhere else to get more challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think with COVID, a lot of them are still online. So you could probably join a club online. And I know, I mean, I've been booked up to do camera club talks into next year that are still on Zoom. So I think this whole period has given us the virtual platform. And a lot of camera clubs are still, even some of them are meeting in person, but still Zooming in presenters. So I think it's changed the style of camera clubs as well. So yeah, I mean, it depends, I guess, on how they're going to be doing their judging or their competitions, if that's going to be online, or whether that's going to be in person. But yeah, I think it's more important to find a camera club that you like, rather than location.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, if they are meeting, you don't want to be traveling for an hour to get to a camera club. But
yeah, that's a good point. And someone else was asking about how do you find a camera club, but I think if you type photographic clubs UK or something like that, or is it the Photographic Alliance of Great Britain, you'll find somewhere a list of camera clubs, and you can see what's convenient and find out more information about them.
Yeah, I mean, in my area, there must be 3 or 4 literally within sort of 15-20 minutes from my area. So they are all over, and there's most areas have a little camera club. There might not be a big one, there might be a small one. Some are big, some are really big, some are really competitive, and then others are just small and personal and just kind of get together with a glass of wine sort of thing. So it depends.
Of course, if you're doing it at Zoom at home, you can have as much wine as you like.
Absolutely. Except if you're presenting.
Oh yes, except that. Another, I think, interesting observation or / question saying, is it not overwhelming that you have to do everything on your own? For example, you're shopping, cooking, photographing, editing. How do you deal with the loneliness and not being able to have discussions with anyone during the process?
I think because I started off in blogging, that's how I started off. So I was doing it all myself anyway. And so it kind of just grew into my business. So I think it is nice to work with other people, to be able to bounce ideas off other people, and to say, do you think this is going to work? Should we do it like that? That's why I do like to bring in a home economist for bigger shoots now. But generally, yeah, it does get lonely. There is definitely a point where I do think that it would be nice to have a full crew around me. But at the same time, I do get really hyper focused on what I'm doing. So so if somebody speaks to me, a lot of the time I don't even hear them. I don't even answer them because I'm so focused on what I'm doing. It's nice not to have that distraction as well. So there's pluses and minuses to working on my own. I think if I had to choose, I still prefer to work on my own totally, because like I said, I really struggle to get out of my head and into a conversation with other people and then back into my head again, particularly on the creativity side. When I'm styling and when I'm creating a set, I really kind of have to go into myself.
I think there was one question from one of the sessions that we did a couple of weeks ago, where a photographer had really felt kind of under pressure and suddenly kind of frozen. They were I think they were shooting in quite a big set, and there is a point where there's obviously advantages and disadvantages, but I think getting to know how you want to shoot, how the environment that you feel comfortable in, and if you begin to make your own decisions about, this is the type of shoot that I'm going to be super collaborative in, and I can't do that on my own. This is the shoot that I'm going to be able to spend a day tweaking every single last bit, because this is something that I want to do on my own. And it is being able to just say, do you know what, I'm happy to switch hats, to be flexible, but there are two different treatments and they're going to be served in two very, very different ways. Because I think that photographer at that point was just feeling super under pressure and like, oh my gosh, I can't, when you go from being in stretch to just being frozen, that can be a real, kind of point of drama, and distress. So if you're in a collaborative shoot, don't be afraid to say and just take a beat, or just grab a glass of water, or just go for a loop, just to resettle yourself. But the question about, look at what suits you as a photographer. Personal project, commercial project, maybe two different treatments.
Yeah, exactly. And when you are on a big set, and I have been on big sets, and everybody's calling you, so it's, Donna, can we do this? Donna, should we do this? Donna, should we do that? And you have to then find that zone, that bubble where that creativity comes out of. Is really difficult. And that's why the home economist that I love working with, her and we work so well, because when I go quiet, she knows not to interrupt me. She knows not to break my chain of thought. And it's so important that you can actually work with people who understand that. So for me, it's definitely about having those quiet moments where I'm in my head and I can go and I'm picturing it, because I'm building a picture in my head as much as I am in a scene. And it's about working with people who also understand that you need to be able to go, not now, I'm busy thinking, I'll get back to you, and let's just process this. It is really important, because it's hard to try and be creative and then answer everybody's questions at the same time. It's very difficult to try and do that at the same time. That's why I mentioned earlier that I don't particularly like restaurant shoots, because I'll go in and I'll do it. But again, it's about seeing things. It's about going through a process in my head. And then and they'll never close a restaurant for a restaurant shoot. So you've got somebody who's coming up and wants to talk to you about your camera and your tripod and this and that, and they want to talk photography with you. And it's really difficult to have to say, I'm sorry, I need to focus on what I'm doing. I need to do, this is what I need to do, because I've got to see this picture in my head. So that's one of my biggest reasons of not doing restaurant shoots. So yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on if you can handle loads of balls in the air at one time, that's fine. But for me, it's I have enough balls in my head.
But I guess because you source most of your props, don't you, yourself?
So I have my own prop collection.
So you built that over the years, and then you get an idea in your head, you know, you're talking to a client and you're kind of building it up, and you're probably sort of thinking that plate, that cutlery, all of these things all come together, and it's, you know, you like you say, you like to visualize it in your head and pull everything together.
Yeah, that's it. And I'm not, a lot of photographers will actually do a full mood board, or they'll sit and sketch it. And I tried that, but it never ends up looking like that. So I just don't do it anymore. I kind of just have this picture in my head, and I'll go with that picture. And if it changes, well, often it changes. Often it looks totally different to how I visualized it to start off with. But yes, when I'm speaking with when I'm dealing with a client, I think that's what's key, though, is when you're dealing with a client, that you are absolutely super clear of what you're going to be doing, both from the client side and the photographer side. So everybody has a clear understanding of what's of expectations. And then even in that case, I will then photograph the plates, and I'll let them see the background that we're going to be shooting on, and so they can have a really good understanding of what they're getting. So yeah, and that can take days, that can take weeks to build that image.
But I guess, does that help settle your confidence when you've got all that preparation under your belt?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely, especially if you know that that's exactly what the client wants. If the client's quite specific and they say, we want a summary theme. So for instance, if you look on my Instagram or my website, there's a shoot that I did for South African Fruit, which is their Pears and Apple campaign. And that the brief from them was very specific. It was, we wanted to be bright and breezy and summery and pretty and all of that. So I had to use a lot of pretty pinks and pastels and flowers, and as soon as I knew that, as soon as the brief was that broad, that descriptive, then I was confident. Then I knew exactly which props I was going to use. I knew how I was going to style the food, and I knew the backgrounds and the whole look of how the picture was going to turn out. A lot of the time it's the clients who just go, oh no, you just do whatever you want to do. You know, they give me free rein. Sometimes that could be actually harder.
Yeah. So we have one last question, and then somebody deserves a high five, I think, which is the first question is, which food photographer or other photographer has especially inspired you?
Oh, I love Joni Simon from The Bite Shot. Her and I are actually really good friends. I think she's just open and honest and out there, and I just love everything about her. Her spirit is just amazing. And I mean, I still use Joni's videos. So if there's things I don't know how to do, I'll hop onto Joni's videos and I'll watch them. So I love everything about her. B. Lubas, who's a UK photographer, very, very good friend of mine. Her and I are really, really close. So if we have a wobbly with a client or something, we get on the phone and say, we lift each other up, we pick each other up, and we say, you know, is this right? Is this wrong? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? So it's really important, I think, to try and build a community with photographers in your genre as well. So we're really good friends, and obviously we do talks together as well. Yeah, Amy Twigg, she's also a British photographer. Love her work. Very, very different to what I do, but beautiful work. Yeah, there's a lot of photographers, and just to be able to see what everybody else is doing and what's happening in the industry is really good, really good.
Yeah, I think like you say, it's really useful to have a group of people around you who you can turn to and get support or honest opinion, or just that sounding board sometimes. Sort of say, yeah, that client's crazy or whatever.
Yeah, because it can be lonely, and you're in your own business and you're on your own and you're making decisions, and then you suddenly start to think, did I make the right decision? Was that the right call? Should I have done this? Should I have done that? And it's nice to be able to speak to someone else in that same industry who knows how the industry works, and who can sound that off and say, what should I be doing? How should I be handling the situation?
Okay, so now somebody deserves a high five, because they've just changed their profile to photographer.
Yay! Yay! I love that. Love that.
Brilliant. So you did that.
Yes.
Well done, Donna.
Love that. We need to see more of that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Let's have that confidence. That's fantastic.
Let's do that as a challenge. Like, let's challenge everybody to go and change their profile.
I love that. Let's do that.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Well, Donna, it's been fantastic hearing from you. Thank you so much for joining us today, because I know you're extremely busy, but it's been wonderful hearing your stories.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I just love these talks and I love the open and honesty. And I hope that this is, as you say, inspired other people to go out and to shoot and just be confident and just love what they do and not try and turn it into anything else bigger than that.
Anyway, thank you all for joining us, and thank you especially to Donna. Bye-bye.
Bye.